This is the Nomad Futurist podcast, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and transformation. Connect with us, share your thoughts with us at nomadfuturist.com. Let's get this started. Here are Phil and Nabil. Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist podcast. This is your host, Nabil Mahmood from Kona, Hawaii.
This is your co-host, Philip Koblenz from Brooklyn, New York.
And this is your guest, Dave Temkin from Hilton Head Island, South Carolina right now.
Outstanding. Dave, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. Let's start with your background and where you're at in your career.
Sure. So I've been doing, let's just call it network stuff for over 20 years now. Basically, I started when I was in high school and kind of grew my career from there. I never went to college, which for many years in my, earlier career was certainly, was a hindrance after it was a help. But nowadays it feels like it doesn't matter all that much. And I've been at Netflix now for, over 12 years.
How did you get into the networking world early part of your career?
So when I was in high school, I was a total introverted nerd. And honestly, I'm still an introverted nerd. So I guess not much has changed there.
It's just so chic now.
It is. I mean, now I think we're technically a protected class. But back then I was just a dork. And so I was like the first person I worked with still a close friend to set up the high school BBS, when we were all still in the BBS days dialing in. And that also happened to be right kind of in the transition time to when the web is just really in its nascent state. And so we also got the first website for the school district stood up. I managed to get a independent study in telecommunications, which was like my first period of the day, 5 days a week. And it was like pretty much the best scam ever, because what I got to do was roll in whenever I wanted to, because I wasn't technically there for attendance, and the teacher who would take attendance would just mark me as there every day. And so I just showed up when I wanted to show up. And then I, either played with, fixed, or broke things, and then went on with my life for the rest of the day. But I wasn't a great student. I actually tested pretty well, but I hated homework. And so what I had done was the first summer, I'm going to say it was my junior year in high school, I actually got an internship at Bristol Myers Squibb. And these internships normally went to college students, not just like a junior in high school. But I had a friend who talked his boss, he's like, hey, know this person, he set up this BBS, set up this website, completely understands this stuff. Clearly there's a lot of potential here. Can we get him an internship? And the person became my manager, this guy, Chris Baldwin, took a shot and gave me this internship. And when I came in the door, basically they put me on help desk, and I was taking phone calls for people with broken printers, and they couldn't mount drives on Windows NT machines and things like that. And, Phil, you know me long enough to know that how do you think I would be at tech support?
I can imagine you getting a little frustrated.
Yeah, it's just not for me. Again, dorky introvert. If you remember, there was the Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, Jimmy
sketch.
Fallon, right?
Yeah, and it was I forget, it was the computer guy or something, right. And he was supposed to be doing tech support, and the person would try to explain it to him for 3 seconds, and then he would just go move, and shove them out of the way.
Exactly. We have a code. We have a code ID 10T.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was me, and it really wasn't playing very well. And but they saw that I had this kind of really strong interest in networks, and they're go shadow the network teams, this guy in networking. And I was okay, please, yeah, I would love that. That sounds amazing. I remember whenever I would go in, when I was doing desktop support, we would have to change, and this is the days before you could just log into a switch and change a VLAN. I'd have to go move a cable from one hub to another hub to put someone onto a different network. I remember looking at this equipment in awe. I'm oh, what is this? This fiber optic cabling? What is this stuff? This is crazy. Like, what does this all do? I don't understand, but I want to understand. So, it was like a perfect fit. They moved me over. And I shadowed this guy, Mike, who I think really didn't like me very much. And, but he also knew that there was some potential there and wanted to see if he could help. And he really did. And what I managed to do was I parlayed that internship into a co-op while I was still in high school. And so going into my junior year, the guidance counselors at the high school had this discussion with my parents about David seems really technically adept. He seems like he understands concepts of a lot of things and can write, read, and all the things we expect people to do, but he won't do any homework and he's going to fail all of his classes. And so part of the reason why I wouldn't do any homework was because I would start this job. They gave me this co-op job at Bristol at 5 p.m. and work from 5 p.m. till 10 p.m. 4 or 5 days a week. And I just would much rather do that than do homework. That was way more entertaining. And so they're there's this tech school thing. We can send him to tech school and he can get half the credits he needs to graduate high school at this tech school. And it's Votech. So it's auto repair and hair cutting and things like that. And just this very new computer program. And of course they send me to that. That actually makes total sense. It probably saves me from failing out of high school. And I get there and the first thing I do is configure their frame relay, their FRAD, to connect to the intermediate unit to get them internet access, which they've been struggling with for weeks. So I get that up and running and it's great and whatever. And I managed to turn the co-op into effectively, instead of going to the Votech school 4 out of 5 days a week, I go straight to Bristol Myers Squibb. So I go to high school in the morning. I have 1 period of independent study, get 2 periods of things that you have to take, like English and a math credit and some phys ed credit. And then I can leave and I get in my car. And I'm a junior with a parking permit, which is a big deal in Council Rock High School at the time. And so I get in my car and I get to drive to Bristol Myers and I work an 8-hour day. And it's great. And they're paying me and it just makes total sense. So I'm doing this and it is this really cool job at this point, where I'm learning and they're paying me and whatever. And I managed to do that for 2 years through graduating high school. And it totally saved me from, like I said, flunking out. And it totally set me up for where I am today. And, I can thank, I can look back specifically on 1 or 2 people, one person specifically who I mentioned before, Chris Baldwin. He saw this in me and was like, hey, this person has this potential. Let's figure out how to harness it. And even though I was this pain in the ass 16-year-old, even though I'm a pain in the ass 40-year-old now, he totally figured out how to do that. And I am eternally grateful to him. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But I totally owe my career to him. And then from there, it was right around the time of the .com boom. And so I moved, I got lured to go work with another friend for Gateway 2000, aka the computer company with the cows. And our job was to move.
They're going to take down Dell.
Yes, they were totally going to take down Dell, and they bought ALR right around that same time, which was a server manufacturer, and they thought they were just going to own the whole market. And our job was to move their data center from
you should have been in marketing.
What is it Yeah, I know, right? I should totally. Clearly, that's still their marketing. I still have a squishy cow that I use, like a stress cow that I still have from those days. I don't have it with me right now, but digress. So I went to Gateway, and our job was to move their website from, I guess it would have been Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where it was hosted in the closet of a warehouse, to Exodus, if you remember the Exodus days, the Exodus data centers in Jersey City. And so we spent a fortune, bought a ton of servers. Then they shipped us a bunch of ALR servers, and I got my first hands on a router because I really wasn't working on routing when I was at Bristol Myers. I was much more. I did the conversion both from hubs and token ring to Ethernet switching. That was like the big deal at the time that I had gotten to work on, but very little layer 3. And so, of course, I cut my teeth at Gateway within the first week by redistributing the full BGP table into RIP v2 and getting it to the point where we literally had to go power down the 7,500 routers that everything was coming into in order to reboot them because I had just completely hung them so badly. But I learned a lot in that job, and I learned so much about how the internet worked. And, I remember, and someone who I still respect a ton and who still is in this industry, reading Avi Friedman's tutorials on BGP. He's a Philly guy, as am I. And, I had a ton of respect for him. And I remember seeing him out and about in the BBS days. And then afterwards, he's one of the first people who I bought internet access from when I was buying enterprise internet access in the Philly area. So anyway, it was like at that job for a while. And then the .com crash happened, and I ended up back in the financial world, or I should say starting in the financial world, and worked for a very large options trading firm. At that time, they were like number 3 or 4 in total options volume on the NASDAQ, and worked there for a while, basically, doing financialist stuff. And this is like the days before high frequency trading, but we were definitely pretty far along the curve. Like I was moving what were analog voice circuits to H323 because we didn't really have SIP at that point, and like trying to get as many of these legacy systems, things when I walked in there that were still on X25 to get all this stuff to run over IP. And so that was super cool, and worked there for a while. I was there through 9/11 and the tragedy and the crisis. Then, we had an office at 2 Rector Street, which is right around the corner from the World Trade Center, and also 40 Wall Street. And so we, I was part of that disaster recovery from a network perspective. That definitely taught me a lot in just kind of crisis management and how to think about that type of stuff. And then, I got sick and tired of being in the financial world, and I moved over. I'd gotten lured to a startup called Right Media. And Phil smiles because he knows this is where, him and I start to intersect. And this is like, has to be 15 plus years ago at this point. But they were one of the first ad tech startups or ad tech companies in the world for what we think of as current, like modern ad tech today, where they're serving billions of ad impressions a day. And, their biggest competitor at that point was DoubleClick. And DoubleClick really wasn't that much bigger than them, but Google then bought DoubleClick. My job at Right Media really was kind of the first time where I kind of got handed the keys and was told, hey, go build this infrastructure. And some of it had already been built, but it all needed to be torn out and redone. It was built kind of on the fly by someone who didn't understand infrastructure. But hey, here are the keys. Go build this infrastructure. Go hire people. Go do what you need to do within certain budget constraints. And I just kind of fell into it, and it was natural. It was like I totally gelled with it, and I was like, this is what I'm good at. I'm good at this like logistical and tactical and even architectural side of like, how do we take this technology and put it into action? And this is both, network and server, and thinking all the way through things like, power and cooling, which, Phil and I have a storied history on from his data center. We don't need to get into that here.
I can tell you these 2 things about who came out on top. Dave Temkin has hair. Philip Koblenz does not. So take from that what you will. But clearly, I'm worse for the wear.
You can't see the gray, I think, but I definitely, and I'm not that far behind you on the hair front in general, but that was actually probably honestly some of the most stressful time of my life. Not just your data center, Phil, and our power travails there, but just in general, it was all on my shoulders to get this infrastructure up and running globally. And like I went on like my first international business trip to London and like things like that, just like super at the time novel to me. And now, although right now I'm obviously not getting on a plane and traveling to London as much as I would really like to, but like getting on a plane and traveling to London back then was like this big deal. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to go travel all the way to London and go figure out how to build a data center here. And, working with the teams who got all this deployed was just, so much fun, but also at the same time, so incredibly stressful. And I learned so much about the entirety of the business at that point. I learned also the hard way how to negotiate for stock at a startup. And if I'm being honest, I don't feel like I got rewarded the way I would have hoped to have gotten rewarded back then, in hindsight. And I think everyone who's ever worked at a startup can tell you that story of the first exit they were a part of, that they didn't realize what they were negotiating for.
That's what makes them smarter on the next go around.
100%. I absolutely, if you sat me right down now and like put a term sheet in front of me, I would know exactly the questions to ask. We could talk about dilution. We could talk about like all the fun stuff. But back then I had no idea what I was talking about. And so I kind of winged it, and, I'm good at winging it with certain things. And that was definitely not a thing I should have winged it for, because I probably had more leverage than I knew. So from there I went and Yahoo bought us. Yahoo bought us because DoubleClick bought us, tongue-tied. Yahoo bought us because Google bought DoubleClick, and Yahoo felt like they had to have an answer to the same ad tech stuff that Google was getting into. And like we could, I'm sure you could have a whole kind of contra podcast to talk about the failures of Yahoo in this space over the years. And like everything else, Yahoo completely destroyed Right Media. But you had a lot of passionate people who were willing to try to work with this, and so and try to make it work. And so we went. I moved to California. They were like, hey, let's keep principal technical people around. And they asked me to move, and I did. And so I ended up there for a couple years. And, frankly, just Yahoo at that point had just rebuffed the Microsoft offer. And so the little amount of stock that I did have got cut in half because their shares fell precipitously after that and never recovered. And I had a deal with my partner, my husband, that if I ever got tired of Yahoo, we would move back east, because he really did not love living in San Francisco. But another friend then referred me to Netflix, and I was like, well, Netflix is pretty cool. We get our 3 DVDs a week from them at that point. Wouldn't it be cool if I went and worked on that? And he's like, all right, fine. So I went, worked at Netflix. And this is in the very, very early streaming days. We had some like really, really awful stuff on streaming. 99.99% of what you would want to watch was still on DVD at that point. But we were kind of learning how to do it. And so, I got there at that point. All of our infrastructure was in a couple of Quest data centers, now CenturyLink, and was responsible for that network infrastructure. Was there for a couple of years. They decided to make the switch to the cloud. And at that point, we also weren't running our own content delivery network. That was outsourced to like Limelight, Akamai, and Level 3. And I was kind of like, you know what? This is not that interesting to me. I'm an infrastructure guy. So I could certainly try to adapt, but at the same time, I wasn't thrilled with how the company was going culturally. This was right on the precipice of Quickster, if either of you remember Quickster, which was the ill-conceived attempt to split the Netflix DVD and streaming business, which 100% made sense from a business strategy perspective, right? If you read the Innovator's Dilemma or other books like that, talk a lot about things like companies who get caught in how do I make money right now? Let me continue investing in that, not how am I going to make money in 5, 10, or 15 years. And so this is like, I don't need the distraction of DVD. So let me get rid of that now and just focus on what's going to make us money in 5 or 10 years, even if it's going to cause us some pain. And they just didn't do a great job of communicating it. And I think, frankly, if they had thought that through a little bit better, it would have been successful. But it didn't matter because they ended up really kind of functionally splitting the company anyway. We just didn't split it from a customer perspective at that point. I digress. So I chose to leave, and I made a very, and this is because I got a job offer from Bridgewater Associates. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. In Connecticut, they're the largest private hedge fund in the world by assets under management. They are infamous for their culture. And Ray Dalio is this, figurehead who, at this point mostly just espouses their culture. And they were super jazzed to get someone from Netflix because Netflix is so known for its culture between, at that time, the culture deck and now the culture memo, and Reed being this, cult of personality from a culture perspective. They're like, all right, yeah, no, we totally want to do this. So they relocated me back to New York, and I went and worked there for a few months and found that, in my opinion, the culture had nothing to do with the Netflix culture, even though they felt like it did. And I actually remember Ray had sent this email to the whole company comparing, contrasting Netflix culture to Bridgewater culture. And I read this after having only been there a couple of weeks. And I was like, this is completely wrong. And my boss is like, well, you should tell Ray that because that's supposed to be our culture. And so I emailed Ray and I never heard back from him. So I digress. I hated it there. I left after 3 months. And then, I had a short stint somewhere else. And then Netflix, my boss literally, Yahoo yimmed me. This is, 12 years ago now, and said, hey, I think, we're changing our mind on doing a content delivery network. If we do that, do you want to build the network? And I was like, well, I kind of like my job, but hell yeah. And so we had a bunch of back and forth, and there was a small amount of drama where I had to come back and basically say, okay, here's why I left. I understand things are different now. I'm really looking forward to that. Is it okay if I come back, more or less, with the other people? And it was fine. And so I came back, and, I've been there since. I came back. I left as a manager. I came back as an individual contributor. I went back to being a manager, and then I went to being a director, and now I'm a vice president. And so now I'm responsible for the network as well as our systems and storage infrastructure for the entirety of the business at this point. So originally it was just for the content delivery network, but now I actually have the studio aspect under me as well.
So if anybody that's listening has ever seen Fauda, you can thank Dave Temkin that you've seen Fauda, or that awesome Michael Jordan thing, Dave Temkin.
Yeah, yes, totally 100% me. No, but it is. I will say, if you had asked me, 20 years ago, where would you be in your career? Like, would I think that my career in any way, intersected with Hollywood? No, I would have no freaking concept of that whatsoever. But I'm running a network somewhere or whatever. I don't know.
And that's what we try to espouse on the podcast, is the idea that the people that get into technology are in this kind of bubble, and it doesn't spread to other verticals or media or finance is certainly no longer true, but hasn't been true for some time. I mean, there is no vertical that doesn't utilize the skill set of someone that gets into critical infrastructure. So, you are facilitating media obviously directly now, but even as someone that's in the data center world or running networks or whatever, it is what is enabling all of these other industries in such a real and direct way that the line between technology company and not technology company has never been thinner, if a line even exists.
I mean, there is no line. I mean, at this point, if you are, transacting any sort of real business, you have some amount of infrastructure, whether that's an iPad and an access point to get you internet access for that iPad so that you can process a payment, or, you have multiple data centers across, continents. Either way, you're somehow using technology for business. I'm down here like I mentioned in Hilton Head, South Carolina, normally I'm up in Hoboken, New Jersey, but we come down here for a few months a year. I drive to farm stands and our favorite, which is random places on the side of the road that sell shrimp down here, because nothing says high quality shrimp like a gas station parking lot. But I'll say you get some amazing fresh local shrimp down here if you're willing to take some chances. But especially now in our pandemic world where most people don't want to handle cash. Everyone's got a Square terminal or something like that. Like, you've got this person who knows nothing other than how to take his boat out and get some shrimp. And now he knows how to process payments and he knows how to take an email address and, stuff like that. And, 10 years ago, you would have never thought that.
It's the data rush. Like back in the day, it used to be the gold rush. We live in a digital economy now, so it's a data rush. Dave, what an inspirational story. The common theme that I've come across, the fact, typically people like you and others that we have actually had the opportunity to interview, that were the change agents, that were fighting the conventional way of schooling and education in the country. In your particular scenario, you were very fortunate that you found your interest at a very younger age. And you were able to go to vocational school. You were able to get an internship very early on in your career. What would you recommend the younger generation that's potentially facing those similar challenges?
You've got a great point. And, I've thought about that a lot. I recognize my privilege in all of this. Like when I really think about how good I've had it, I'm a gay man who, I'm white. I'm, cis presenting. I generally don't have any problems from that aspect. So I realize that I've had it super easy and that it's really easy to forget that people have it, cannot have this necessarily same experience, either because of their background or who they are or what they do. I remember when I was at vocational school, one of the things they would do is you went 4 days a week to your job, and then 1 day a week you went there for career counseling and some other classes. And I remember one of the things they would do is they would do a class trip where some of the people in your class would come and watch what you do for work for a day. And they brought them to Bristol Myers Squibb over in Princeton. And the teacher was like, I had no idea you're basically working an executive, not executive, but an office job at this point, that, you're not out there slinging cables and stuff. And she was like, yeah, you don't need to come in for that once a week thing anymore. You can just go to work 5 days a week. We're good. That, again, just super privileged. So when I think about from what people could or should do, the biggest thing at this point is just the curiosity aspect and just asking everyone a lot of questions, because eventually someone engages with you and sees that potential. Because, frankly, it is hard to make inroads without some sort of sponsor, without someone who's there to help, whether that's a teacher or a boss or, a more senior friend or family member or something like that. You need someone who's going to get you to that first step. And, I know that I personally am trying to find ways to engage, whether that's going back to school, helping people or working with organizations that are more focused on youth and tech. And some of the outreach work that I've done, for example, when I was on the board at Nanog, I founded the College Immersion Program, which is super ironic because, as we talked about, I didn't go to college. But the whole point of the program was to go find people who potentially would have an interest in infrastructure and figure out how to get them engaged with this community to help get them, first of all, excited about what we do, because it's really easy, I'm pointing at my iPhone, even though we're not doing video here, but it's really easy to engage with an app and be curious about how an app works and how it's written. And it's funny, my brain doesn't work like that. I could care less about how, these apps on my phone work. They're totally utilitarian to me. I know most of them are written in Swift, but like aside from that, I couldn't write Swift if my life depended on it. Couldn't write most programming languages aside from maybe BASIC and Perl unless my life depended on it. And so what we are trying to do is get younger people excited about, like, okay, well, when I press this button, what happens behind that? Like, what's that touching? What's the infrastructure? What's the cabling? What's the fiber that it rides to get there? And what data center is that in? And like, how do we get data centers to work? How do we get the power and the cooling and all that other fun stuff? And so finding those types of organizations that have that kind of outreach is probably pretty key if you're in a position where you can reach out. If you're a younger person who can find a Nanog in North America or Ripe in Europe or Apricot in Asia, those network operator groups are definitely helpful. And what we've seen is smaller groups splinter off of those to people who are younger and who really are just trying to get started, because it can be really intimidating to just show up at one of those, whether it's virtually or in person. And, we assign, in the case of Nanog, we assign sponsors to people and just like, hey, how do we get you to meet people? How do we get you to figure out what is important to you and how can we help?
I think it's an incredible point, and part of the benefit that really both of us had was the timing that we were kind of coming into our own. Like, the invention of the internet happened when we were at the age where we were there, like at the kind of industrial revolution, right? So we're not really intimidated by the underlying infrastructure as kids because there is no basis for comparison. There is like rotary phone, touch-tone phone, and then now this new reality. And something I'm struck by, I have two children. I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, and something I'm struck by is how well they are able to pick up like the phone and usage of the apps, and they don't kind of understand how it works. But what I try to tell them until I'm blue in the face is trying to explain to them why it works. And there's nothing from from the standpoint of what the curriculum and their schools, to the extent that they used to go to school. That's a thing that might never happen again, but they used to go to school. It wasn't that long ago. Is that the curriculums aren't really designed to talk about like the underlying mechanics of technology in many cases, because some of the teachers that have now had to adapt to telelearning and technology in a way that they hadn't before, it's just not a skill set that you typically put in early childhood education. And we take for granted the fact that we're not intimidated by underlying infrastructure because we were there when it was invented. So we just had to learn how it worked. And that's why our generation, certainly your generation of engineers, are so are so unique in that you understand all of the underlying technologies and infrastructure in a way that a systems engineer today or a computer engineer today thinks the Amazon API is how compute infrastructure is deployed, and without a recognition that there are pieces of hardware that are on the backside of that. There are network cards and motherboards and RAM and things that people are now again totally intimidated to even think about or touch because they just don't have. You can't even take apart a laptop anymore, like a MacBook laptop. There's no battery, there's no screw that has a normal head on it. You can't even upgrade the hard drive on the latest ones because it's just all soldered and it's just they're keeping people away from that infrastructure as possible. I don't even know what the question is, but help fix it.
No, I mean you're entirely right. I mean, what's the cute bumper sticker, which is like the cloud is just someone else's computer. I mean, which is entirely true. It is someone else's computer. It is not that different from if you just deployed that computer yourself. It has certainly consolidated. I remember when I first, started working in the internet industry, you had hundreds and thousands of these small networks that had small amounts of capacity behind them. And now it's all rolled up behind, Amazon and Google and Microsoft and, some of the smaller cloud players are, they're in there, but they're niche and they're surviving, but they're not nearly at the scale of others. But all of these companies need people to work on this stuff. And, if I'm being honest, it's not easy to recruit. We hire a decent amount of people every year. And like, people don't just fall out of trees into jobs. And, Netflix has pretty, notoriously high standards for people, but it's not even that. It's that just in general, the candidate pool is not the size that you would expect it to be. But, what we are starting to see is more people who are interested in this stuff at a younger age, where we're getting reach outs for things like co-ops and internships and things like that. We've been working with historically underserved communities to try to find people who, to Nabil's point, may otherwise find it hard to engage. And so, we're going out to HBCUs, and we're going internationally, and we're talking about, hey, this is what our technology is and what our challenges are. If this is exciting to you, then let's talk and let's figure out how you can, develop your career here. And a few years ago, that it wasn't how we thought about it. It was like, no, we only hire, super senior people who, can just basically be dropped into a role and can just perform. And that doesn't scale.
Yeah, so a couple of things come out of it, right? So one is that we've actually created this UI and user experience whereby that's what the current generation is building their lives, their careers, and their future on. The second part of it is that we've created this term called auto magic in the industry, that the executive management thinks that automatically there will be people that will come and work on the foundational elements. However, there aren't any, because we're not talking about it openly. Hence, where Phil and I, being on the speaking circuit in data centers and technology and other conferences heretofore, started the concept of Nomad Futurist, that we actually need to voice our opinion and bring stories like yours to the general populace.
Especially now that they know nerds can take international business trips.
Yeah, I never realized, growing up, how much I would enjoy this kind of stuff. I would never really traveled very much except for Florida when I was a kid. So, it's totally
which was a country by itself.
Yeah, well, that could be a podcast in itself. But it is definitely a totally different thing. And now it's exciting to go and be able to talk about this, this stuff with people who have just such different backgrounds and different needs and different abilities, and to just explore, what the possibilities are, both in getting people more involved and also just how do we collaborate, how do we work together, and all that kind of fun stuff.
So what's that one takeaway, if you look back at your entire career, that one thing that stands out for Dave Temkin that you would emphasize on and share with the younger generation to focus on?
I definitely have to fall back on, you need a mentor, you need someone, and you need someone to help you, and you need someone to call you out when you're not when you're not doing what you need to be doing. And you need to find that person, or hopefully they find you, and you need to engage with that person, and you need to trust that person with your life. And that to me, I can just look back on. I mentioned Chris, I mentioned Mike, who, like I said, I don't think really liked me all that much, at least at that point, but he respected me, and I respected him an awful lot, to the point where the next job I was at, when there was a position open as a peer of mine, he was the first person who I recruited, even though I really didn't feel like we were buds in any way, shape, or form. And that is because I really looked up to him from a mentorship perspective and thought to myself, hey, this person is smart. This person understands it and just gets it. And this person can teach me a lot.
That's a great message. Finding the mentor and believing in somebody and trusting them to help with your career.
If you had to pinpoint the characteristic of the kids that are seeking out these types of mentors, and perhaps your trust is one of them. Another one is, in the current type of environment we are, you find a lot of younger folks and even adults are reticent to, be maybe embarrassed that they don't know something. Everyone wants to be, hyper expert in everything that they're involved in. I know even my kids, he plays Minecraft and he's like, I'm a god at Minecraft. and I look at him, I don't really know how to play Minecraft, but I can assure you, you're not doing it right. But he has to be a god in order to want to participate. So, how much of that, I don't know if it's the word humble or trusting, what is the type of confidence that you need as a kid to be able to, kind of seek that out?
You need to be able to ask questions that you think are stupid, or you think that someone is going to judge you for not knowing. And it doesn't matter. You need to just get over that hump. And I'll be honest, in my 40 years at this point, sometimes that still challenges me. Sometimes I just think to myself, I should know this, and I don't, and it's going to be embarrassing. But that curiosity aspect of asking questions is what's going to get you over that hump and get you to a place where people are like, okay, this person is engaged, this person is interested, and they are genuine. And there are no stupid questions, and there really are no stupid people. At the end of the day, you are trying to learn something. You're trying, these are people who we hope are the future of this industry. The best thing they could possibly do is ask an awful lot of questions.
I can assure you from my experience with Dave Temkin that 9 times out of 10, he's the smartest person in the room. So I can see how it would be difficult for you to ask a question that.
And then 1 out of 10 times, I'm just the loudest.
Yeah, and that counts. Life is a confidence game, man.
It is.
All right, so let's pivot for a second to the times that we're living in right now. You have this huge, obviously, disruption that's going on since March. Everybody working from home. Obviously, technology companies are fairly well suited from a digital transformation standpoint to have the tools to be able to deal with the COVID disruption or COVID times or whatever the trending hashtag of the moment is. The new normal. I forgot.
It's already the old normal, Phil.
Yeah, the old normal, the new abnormal, which is I like the Molly Jong-Fest and Rick Wilson, new abnormal. I think this is perfect. I guess the question, you manage a large team, and you've had to kind of adjust and communicate with them and make decisions based on that. What have you noticed as the biggest takeaways, the biggest disruptions, if you will, the biggest changes that you think have either some level of permanence or you think might go back to the way they were once we get past whatever it is happening right now?
I mean, at this point, the best thing we can do is be empathetic, because it's tough. I can't pinpoint one specific thing. I have people who I work with who are struggling with childcare. I have people who I work with right now who are, basically running away from fires while struggling with childcare. This is a rapidly evolving situation. I have people who are struggling with eldercare, and just in general, everyone's kind of in a different place from a mental health perspective. I know that this has been challenging for me, even as an introvert who before thought to myself, "Oh no, yeah, great. Friday night at home sounds great," to now it's I really would like to go out somewhere. And so I think that stuff bleeds into your work interactions, and that frustration you have and that kind of social longing that's missing, both is a good thing and a bad thing, because it can also be exhausting. You just get Zoom fatigue. And I think that's the thing that I see the most, which is I used to sit on video conferences all the time and it wasn't that big of a deal, or at least I thought it wasn't. But now that everyone is, it seems like everyone is struggling to some extent. And, I was reading a paper that made sense to me, but I don't want to say is necessarily correct because I'm not, able to judge that, where it's if you and I, or, the three of us are sitting in a room and we're having a discussion, we get the visual cues from each other instantly. I can see if your eyes move in a certain fashion, or if your hands move, or whatever that might be, and your brain is processing that in nanoseconds, and you can choose whether to start speaking or whether to flip the table over, or whatever you want to do in a pretty rapid fashion.
You are from Jersey.
I am. I'm technically from the Northeast Philadelphia suburbs, so I don't want to overstate that, my Jersey cred. But I call it a hoagie, not a suburb grinder. But you get those cues in nanoseconds, and you can judge your reaction based on that. And if we're on Zoom or Meet or whatever, at the best, we're 50 milliseconds from each other in that interaction. Whatever you've done long before it actually is presented to me and long after I've started speaking. And so our brains are probably super confused at this point, trying to work that out. And I think I look back on that, and I think a lot of other people, and even myself, have struggled with that in the past, where I've been a remote person. I was one of the first people who was remote at Netflix, and everyone else is sitting in a conference room, and you feel like you're always disrupting. You feel like you're interrupting a conversation because you can never quite get into it without basically bowling over someone who is already trying to speak, because there's not that cue of like, my head popped up or my eyes engaged with the current speaker. So I think all of that together puts us all in a situation where it's like stressful and exhausting. And to your point of the new normal, I don't know what that is. I hope that we find a good middle ground, because I know that this right now at 100% is not sustainable.
There's that show Upload. I don't know if you've seen it on like Amazon Prime. I think it's Amazon Prime, where somebody exists in this kind of virtual plane, and then you have the people that are in real life, and they make all of these like suits so you can feel the other person virtually. It's a little bizarre, but it's an interesting premise in the times we live in.
I hear voices. So COVID-19 has transformed our lives. How has that impacted Netflix? Just for our users, Netflix started about 1997 as a DVD distribution and sale business.
Yes.
Big blockbuster competition.
Exactly. 2007, part of the business I heard or reckoned that kind of got shifted and more into streaming. How has that business been impacted with COVID-19?
From a viewership perspective, we had a great quarter a couple quarters ago based on that, but that's not something we really want to celebrate, right? Like, there's a lot of people going through a lot of stuff in the world. But what we're just doing is focusing on making sure that we've got enough capacity available around the world. But as the lockdowns get lifted in various places, I think people are finding other things to do with their time, right? The weather's nice. They can do outdoor activities and stuff like that. And so, the impact was felt much earlier on, which was just making sure that we were in a good place from a capacity standpoint, a relationship standpoint. And, since then it's kind of been, I wouldn't call it business as usual, but it has definitely been, there's not really the scramble that there was right at the beginning.
For instance, I've noticed I've spent more time on Netflix now than I actually ever did before throughout the week. The good thing is I'm not watching TV. Anyhow, the point that I'm getting to is in infrastructure and technology environment, we have actually stretched boundaries and limitations and the restraints that we had with COVID-19, with bandwidth, latency, and so on and so forth. Netflix is actually not streaming at the rates that they used to in January, February, because there's more user base. Do you foresee any further challenges as we potentially continue to be in this lockdown situation for the next year and a half, maybe two?
Well, we generally actually have rolled back most of those caps. So, we did that early on as a preventative measure in cooperation with governments and that requested that we do it. But now when you watch Netflix, you're generally getting it in full quality. And so, we're in a position now where we needed capacity, we were able to add capacity, but, it was mostly issues on downstream from us. It wasn't necessarily our network that was struggling. But if we're in this mode for another 2 years, the much bigger concern is just making sure that we continue to safely produce content, which we've already started. We've already restarted production in various markets. But that's fraught with, it's slower to make content like that. And it's, there's a lot of challenges that you didn't have before. It is just something where, we just hope to stay the course, and we hope that, more lockdowns get lifted. And frankly, we just hope there's a vaccine or a therapeutic that is, that works well, so that we can get back to a world in which we're, making all the shows that everyone wants us to make.
Dave, how do you continue to learn? I mean, our industry is changing dynamically every day, every second. We've got something new. How do you keep yourself going, and what mediums, tools, resources do you use to stay on top of everything?
Don't say Christian Koch's newsletter.
Christian Koch's newsletter is quite useful.
No, it's my favorite. It's my favorite.
Google, is it Foundations Christian Koch, and I think you'll find a link to it. Quite an interesting newsletter. Just kind of gives you the greatest hits of what's going on in the infrastructure space every week. That's my one plug. But in general, stuff like that, and so things like light reading and various other just kind of, whether it's discussion forums or industry newsletter. Like, look, I'll spend an hour from time to time just reading the NANOG mailing list, and there's a lot of completely mundane, boring crap on there, but there's also some really interesting stuff about like how people are thinking about networks going forward. Things like the IETF mailing list, things like that as well. Those various working group mailing lists are interesting to read. And then, decent I want to focus on right now is like thinking about how does this intersect with business. And so, books like The Innovator's Dilemma and stuff like that are really important to kind of understanding the intersection between what we're working on and, how we can leverage that to make our businesses and our infrastructure behind those businesses better.
I think that's an interesting thing that most people, don't necessarily think about. They think about the resources that you read maybe to learn things in real time, like what new technologies are the people, the car people read Car and Driver, and the Popular Mechanics people would read Popular Mechanics. But thinking about strategy and understanding the way the people that created some of the innovations that we take advantage of thought about why they're creating those innovations or how they should think about it. You mentioned earlier the idea of thinking 10 or 15 years ahead as opposed to thinking what's making you money today. I think that's and to a certain extent, I would imagine that not having to travel as much, not having to be kind of in the moment as much because we're kind of home on this, seemingly never ending quarantine, you have more available time to think about, the macro world and the macro elements of it rather than just, singular, technologies.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like thinking about the industry as a whole and how this all fits together. Like, like I mentioned, so much of it, for example, sits behind AWS, but we still have to think about the infrastructure. I mean, it doesn't really abstract it. You think about how you buy compute in AWS, you're buying it by server type, right? You're thinking about that. You're buying network capacity to that server. Like it is literally someone else's computer that's hosted in their data center. And so understanding that is super important. I've spent a decent amount of time reading about the various, cloud technologies, Kubernetes and things like that aren't necessarily germane to my day-to-day job, but I think are really important that I understand.
Yeah, one of the things in being a technologist, you have to be able to understand cross-platforms. You've got to be able to understand, simple things like power, distribution, air conditioning. What's a data center? Right?
Yeah.
And all the elements that go in a data center so that you can connect dots. That's really the core of it all, that you got to be able to connect dots. What's some of the cool tech that you're looking at that our younger generation should potentially start educating themselves on?
At this point, when I think about especially networks, which has always been my focus, we're kind of almost moving to I don't want to say post SDN world, software defined networking, but we are in a point now where the industry is sort of fragmented, and there's a lot of potential opportunity there for how that technology is going to evolve, how we think about network switches and routers and how we move traffic around. I think really understanding what the challenges are in that space and what the potential solutions are to those challenges, understanding the vendors in that space and what they're really focused on. Because if you sit with various vendors in that space, they all kind of have a different story for what they think is important. And I think the thing is, though, trying to understand all those stories is really helpful, and understanding how that comes together. And then, there's still the big vendors that are out and about, things, people like Cisco and Juniper, and even now Arista, you could call a big vendor. Understanding how they think about the world is really important to figuring out how to engage in your own career and how to understand what's going to be important to those people's customers, right? Like you can literally think about that in the aspect of, Cisco has probably almost, if not every Fortune 500 as its customer. Understanding what Cisco thinks is important from an infrastructure perspective is going to give you a pretty good idea as to what the world thinks is important from an infrastructure perspective.
Which, to add to your plug, is another reason why Christian's newsletter is so good, because he kind of digs into, the kind of analysts' reports and the quarterly reports and whatnot of each of those companies.
100%. The analyst reports are great, like the ones especially that you can get publicly, and you can glean so much information from those reports. Some of them are a little ridiculous. Some of them are not really all that useful, and some of them are just read like a Gartner press release. But there are others that are, really good insight into the co-location business and the submarine cable business and the IP transit business, and understanding, what is the future there? What are companies betting on?
Right. As we wrap it up, I guess if I want the world to know what Dave Temkin's most excited about in terms of future technology, are you excited about, the Hilton Head to Hoboken automated vehicle just taking you there, so you don't actually have to drive on I-95? You could just press a button and then snooze the entire way. What is it? What is on the horizon that is going to get you excited when it finally comes to fruition?
I mean, that's a fantastic question, because I feel like every time I think about that, I'm like, wait, well, I guess we kind of have that technology, but it's not perfect. And so, I think in general, what I'm really excited about is ways that we're going to be able to engage with like content going forward, and whether that's Netflix or whether it's YouTube or whether it's TikTok or whatever. I think that we're seeing that shift pretty dramatically. I think how we figure out how to engage with people, and what the intersection is of that technology and both kind of social change and what that technology drives from a social change perspective, and how that makes people's lives better. That's like way more important to me, frankly, than like a cool self-driving car. And so to me, that aspect of it, and if you would ask me this question 10 years ago, I would have rattled off a bunch of like pointless tech. And I think like now that I'm an old man, I think about this stuff and I'm like, what's really important to me is like society doesn't melt down.
Right. More important to you than a refrigerator that tells you when it's time to buy milk.
Yeah, look, I don't need to knock on my refrigerator door to get a view of what's inside. I'll open the freaking door. Like the carbon footprint of me opening the door to see what's inside versus the carbon footprint of having two giant LED displays that can display what's in there. And like, it's like the Tesla battery problem. It's like, at what point does that battery and all the rare metals that went into it, is that worse for the earth than like if you just burn some dinosaurs? Those types of things are existential questions that I'm just glad that people are thinking about, frankly. And I think it's important that, to my point about curiosity before, we keep asking those kinds of questions.
Didn't work out well for the cat, but for us, I think it's going to help society.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, this has been incredible. Your story is just, if I had to like etch out of marble the type of guest we had in mind when envisioning this podcast, you are our David.
I have my pants on though.
I have no way to verify that, actually.
Zoom. No.
More entertaining, Twitter accounts than Dave Temkin's Twitter account, as he fights with every, rental car agency from, up and down the Eastern
This is
seaboard.
what my current use of Twitter. It's pretty sad.
And it works. My God, they respond to you in a second, right? It's incredible. Like why?
If it didn't
why
work,
Hertz?
I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, why
wouldn't
hurts?
do it if it didn't work.
It's the old Seinfeld, right? You know how to take the reservation, but you don't know how to keep the reservation. And that's really the crux of the reservation.
Yep.
Anyway, this has been great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much
for having me.
time, Dave. This has been great. Nothing lasts forever. Markets will come back, currencies will rebound, businesses will go on, and we'll all move on. That could happen next week, next month, or next year. I'm confident that those who prepare rather than panic will come out of this stronger. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Nomad Futurist. Check us online at nomadfuturist.com.